Hello, my friends. We are continuing our conversations with luminaries, scientists, philosophers, humanitarians, and just about everyone who's making a difference in the world for the greater good. So, today it's my distinct pleasure to first of all welcome Rajnish Khanna, who we've spoken to before when we were talking about photobiology, planetary microbiome, and on and on. And today we have a very special guest that Rajnish is going to introduce. So please, Rajnish, please introduce our very special guest today.
Thank you, Deepak. It's a pleasure for me to be back here, and also a pleasure to introduce Professor Christopher Gardner. And he's a professor of medicine at Stanford University. And I've known him for several years and really admired his work and focus on food nutrition and how uh, on diets and nutrition, and also some work on microbiomes.
So thank you, Rajnish. Dr. Gardner, I'm an internist too, endocrinologist by training,
Oh, great.
neuroendocrinology. So yeah, and I have a professorship at UCSD and University of Florida and Mount Sinai. Just for the record, I'm not a new age goof, even though
Okay.
portrayed as such. It's a great honor to speak to you. Our audience is pretty large. By the time this is on social media in a couple of months, it's a few million people. And most of them don't know you or me. Some of them know me, but we get new people and Rajnish. So I always like to start by welcoming my guests, but also knowing a little bit about their background, including where they grew up, went to school, and how they got to be doing what they're doing today. So give us a little synopsis of your life, if you don't mind.
Sure. And then feel free to cut me off if I start rambling
Oh,
too
no,
much.
please ramble. Please
Right.
ramble.
So I grew up on the East Coast in New Hampshire, and I attended Colgate University and was a philosophy major and got disillusioned with academia and tried to live a bohemian lifestyle for about 6 years after that, searching for myself and trying to pay my way. I worked in a lot of restaurants because that's a pretty easy job to get in a lot of places. And I actually had a girlfriend who was vegetarian who dumped me. I became a vegetarian to try to get her back. She didn't want me back. I liked being a vegetarian, so I started working in vegetarian restaurants. And about 6 years into my bohemian journey, I thought I should grow up and do something for a living. So I thought about opening a restaurant, and maybe a vegetarian restaurant. I thought, people are going to make fun of my amino acids. Maybe I need another degree. Maybe if I went back to school and got a master's degree, then I could articulately respond to those amino acid challenges. Okay, I'm going to show up at Berkeley so I can still be a hippie. And they didn't want me to apply because I'd been a philosophy major with no science background. They said to even apply to the master's in nutrition, you need organic chem, regular chem, biochem, biology, etc. I think they tried to frighten me off, but I took all those classes. I got all A's and A pluses, even though I'd only been a B plus student my whole life. And I came back and I said, can I enroll in the master's now? And they said, you're smarter than we thought. How about getting in the Ph.D. program? And I said, why would I need a Ph.D. to run a restaurant? But wait, I remember how much promise you have when you're in school. You haven't picked yet. Maybe I want that feeling again when I could be anything. And so actually enrolled in the Ph.D. in nutrition, a little disillusioned because I was very much into human behavior and food. And I found a lot of nutrition science was mechanisms and cells and rat studies. So I ended up figuring out a dissertation for myself, working with a Guatemalan professor named Fernando Viteri. And I actually studied acculturation in the Hispanic population of San Francisco in the Mission District and their cardiovascular risk factors. And somehow that led not to a restaurant, but it led to a postdoc at Stanford University in the group where I still am today, the Stanford Prevention Research Center. This is a division of the Department of Medicine at Stanford. Stanford doesn't have a school of public health, but we're kind of like a mini school of public health, where mostly what we do are human intervention studies. So half of us are behavioral psychologists, and then others are content experts. So I'm a nutrition expert, there's a physical activity expert, there's a tobacco control expert, but a lot of folks are working on behavior change, because that's one of the most challenging things in public health. We know the right things to do, but can we inspire people and motivate them and find ways to get them to achieve that? So when I started out, I was working as a cardiovascular epidemiologist, and I had big data sets, and all I needed was a computer. And I did a lot of association studies. If you eat more of this, it's associated with less of that. Somebody should do a trial. And I thought, but not me. Those are too expensive. And then somebody gave me a shot at this, Deepak. And they gave me $40,000. Oh, I'm rich. I have so much money to do a trial. And then somebody gave me $80,000. And then somebody gave me $200,000. And then I tried writing a grant, which is basically a vegetarian low-fat diet versus a convenience food low-fat diet. And the NIH gave me $750,000. And then I got $1 million to study soy and 1.4 to study garlic and 2.5 to do a weight loss study. And recently I did an $8 million weight loss study of low carb versus low fat that we might get into later. But I want to say that sort of having exceeded all my expectations, oh my God, I only wanted a restaurant. Somehow I'm at Stanford and I have millions of NIH dollars and I'm going to medical conferences. And here I do a study and I showed people there was some whole foods, they were lowering their cholesterol. I said, this is great. We've established this, go do it. And they said, well, you fed us for the study. You're going to keep feeding us? Because I don't really cook that much. And if not, I think I'm going to go back to the way I used to eat before. And I study with supplements with garlic and real garlic, and nothing lowered cholesterol. And I gave a big results presentation at the end. And I said, I'm sorry, nothing lowered cholesterol, none of these garlics, not the supplements and not the real thing from Gilroy, California. But thanks for being part of an important NIH study. And a couple of the participants hung out afterward and they said, where did you get those supplements? We'd like to buy some. And I said, I just gave the results presentation. It didn't work. Why do you want them? And they said, well, it's kind of a religious fervor thing. We really believe in garlic. And so we'd like to order some anyway. And I thought, oh my God, I've exceeded all my personal expectations and I have all this NIH funding and I'm having no impact. My life is a wreck. Okay, so at that point, I teamed up with a pediatrician and we were responding to an NIH request to think about new strategies for young adults about weight management, considering that sort of young adults are the demographic that put on weight the fastest because they left home and they're on their own eating. And we came up with this social responsibility and engagement type application that was rejected. I thought it was pretty good, but it was rejected. And so we talked about it. I said, we probably didn't have enough pilot data. Where would we get pilot data to reapply? And I said, I don't know, I'm lost. And my pediatrician friend said, you moron, we're on the Stanford campus. We're surrounded by young adults. We should have a class. And I said, really? Can we study kids in our own class? Yes, we can get human subjects approval for that. So wow, how long does it take to get a new class approved? Because I was mostly a researcher at Stanford. And in 3 weeks, we had a class approved. It's called Food and Society. I've been running it for 15 years at Stanford. And Deepak, it has changed my career because we decided in the class not to talk about health. We only talked about animal rights and welfare, global warming, climate change, greenhouse gases, planetary boundaries, human labor abuses in slaughterhouses, fast food workers, agricultural workers. It was really career shifting for me because I watched the students wrestle with these issues. And I watched most of the students in the class motivated to change their diets in many different ways. So the one who was interested in animal rights and welfare went vegetarian. And the one who was a rancher, but really thought the way we treated livestock was fine, at least in their family ranch, they were actually concerned about greenhouse gases. And so they went and were only getting grass-fed, pasture-raised beef. And there was a conservative in the group who really was upset that their small business loans go out to fast food franchises. And if they go under, the small business loan doesn't get repaid. But Wendy's and Taco Bell and McDonald's don't lose anything because they're paying for the real estate. They're getting money from their real estate. It's the franchise owners who got the small business loans. and went under. And so they said, I'm not eating fast food anymore. And I thought, oh my gosh, you went vegetarian. You're only eating pasture-raised beef and less of it. You've boycotted fast food restaurants. I've been trying my whole life to get things like that to happen, from a nutrition science randomized controlled trial, NIH funded perspective. And so this was just an epiphany for me, which led to me hooking up with a group called the Menus of Change, which was established 9 or 10 years ago. Started out as a collaboration between the Culinary Institute of America and the Harvard School of Public Health. And the Menus of Change target audience was the food industry. And I was on a scientific board that teamed up with a business board that was informing a board of chefs. And the idea was, what are some of these nutrition things that aren't going to go away? The poor chefs get stuck with going, let's go from butter to margarine today. Nope, back to butter. Nope, back to margarine. Let's be keto. Let's be gluten-free. Let's be paleo. They were feeling very reactive, not proactive. And they were saying, okay, so what nutrition things really aren't going to go away? And from a business point of view, what will make reasonable money? And so we actually came up with this 24 principles of the Menus of Change. And 12 of those are operational and 12 of them are nutritional. And they we've had these annual meetings trying to promote these 24 principles that would push good nutrition and good business and help chefs. And the fun thing for this, Deepak, was working, they can make anything taste delicious. And I realized a huge missing point of all that I've been doing this whole time was deliciousness. So one of the leaders of this group, Greg Drescher, came up with this phrase, the unapologetic deliciousness of food, and that we should elevate this. And I thought, oh my God, I can't tell you how much that means to me as a public health representative. I feel like I've been apologizing for decades. I want you to eat less sugar, and I want you to eat less red meat. And I have this cardboard kind of stuff, and it's got a lot of fiber. It's going to be really good for you, but it doesn't taste very good. And so I'm apologizing ahead of time at what I'm asking you to. I got to stop apologizing. I want to work with these chefs. And so interestingly, one of the main themes that tied many of these different principles of the Menus of Change together was something that they've called the protein flip. And the protein flip is this idea that in the US, for dietary habits, the center of the plate is traditionally some kind of meat. It's pork chops or chicken or steak or something. And there are sides around the plate. And the culinary concept here was they would put plants at the center of the plate. There'd be some kind of heritage rice grain with some beautiful lentils on top and seared vegetables and Moroccan spices, and maybe 2 ounces of steak or 2 ounces of fish or 2 ounces of chicken or pork. And so it would really be the plants that were the center of the plate and not the meats. And so it was a culinary concept. It was based on deliciousness. And instead of apologizing, the idea was to go forward and say, this tastes as good or better than what you were going to have. This is going to blow your taste buds away. And so this is a fascinating concept that I was working with. They actually had me at one of their conferences give a little protein 101 talk. They said, oh, we're going to be asking people to cut back on protein. Are they going to freak out or not? Christopher, can you give us an explanation of that amino acid thing? Came back to the amino acids. They were finally asking me about the amino acids. So I got to do this. And so I ended up writing a whole paper on this because my 8-minute talk at the first conference went over really well, turned into a 20-minute talk, 30, 1 hour. I actually had a sports conference invite me to give a 2-hour talk on protein because I pointed out pretty clearly Americans don't need that much protein. If you look at our guidelines for protein, it's not as much as people think it is. And then I showed we have data to see how much protein Americans eat, and it's way more than they think. It's way more than the RDA, and the recommended daily allowance already has a safety buffer on it. So I said, look, there is plenty of room to cut back on protein. Then I had a whole section on plant foods and amino acids. I said, this is a myth that plants are missing amino acids. They have all 20. It's not quite perfect in terms of proportions, but it's really not as bad as you think. So let me show you some math and some distributions. I actually made a heat map of amino acids and all the different foods, and people were, oh my God, really? I've been misled this whole time. Thank you for sharing this with me. And so in our paper, we said, we suggest that Americans eat less protein. How about 25% less? Let's just pick that as a number. And then after getting 25% less, you'd still be way over the RDA. And let's shift 25% of that from animal to plant. Not asking people to go vegetarian or vegan, just to model this. Let's do a 25% shift. And let's get my environmental buddies on board. And let's look at greenhouse gases and water and things like that. And so with this 25% down and 25% shift over, it was about a 40% decrease in greenhouse gases from what's usually contributed by the agricultural sector. It was about 8% of the Paris Climate Agreement pledge from the US. Just this one 25-25 shift was 8% of the US's pledge. And it was a saving of 10% of water toward agriculture. 3 trillion gallons of water would be saved. And you'd get plenty of protein. And the plant protein would be fine. And so Deepak, this has sort of brought me back to my philosophical undergraduate beginnings. I got this PhD by mistake, and I got the faculty position by mistake, and I somehow got NIH dollars, and I got to go to medical school conferences. And I wasn't really having the impact that I thought that would have. And so now partnering with chefs and thinking in terms of institutional food, my current goal is sort of an aspirational diet that gets human nutrition and deliciousness and environmental sustainability and social justice. And who could change? I actually think we need to change the kind of foods we grow and produce. Who could change that? Is it the individual student in my class? Is it individual patients that doctors see? Or 50% of the food Americans eat now is out of the home. They're eating at work sites, they're eating at hospitals, they're eating at universities. And so I was partnering with these chefs who were ordering pallets of food for all the patients in the hospital, or all the students in the university, or all the K-12 school kids, or all the Googlers or Apple employees. So the latest fun I've been having is this idea of deliciousness in institutional food settings. We could really ultimately change agriculture by showing some of these producers that if they shifted what they were growing and producing, there would be a demand for it. And so sort of the final note I'll end on here before I'll stop ranting is that we've had a spin-off of the Menus of Change. And it's called the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. This has been going for about 7 years. We have about 60 different universities that signed up on board. And the goal is for the dining halls of universities to be living laboratories where we can do mini experiments on the behaviors of the students and the attitudes of the students toward food, with bowls or different choice architecture or labeling differences. And so we try to get one university to pilot this. And if the pilot seems to work, we offer it up to the collaborative. We've now published 5 or 6 papers where one university did this. It got replicated in 5 or 6 universities. And we're publishing papers on this approach: deliciousness, healthy nutrition, environmental sustainability, social justice. And the target audience is the young adults who aren't yet parents, they aren't yet business owners. And what we're hoping is that we change the palates of these college-age students, that they will go out and change their work sites, their families, and we can get a bigger shift going on. And my ultimate goal is to change social norms around food, like we've seen with cigarettes and like we've seen with seatbelts and a couple other things. I think food is next. So I'm trying to help move forward a food revolution based in deliciousness. Okay, that was quite a rant. I don't know how long that took me. That took me 18 minutes. I hope that was okay.
Good. It's very good, and it's a perfect story, and you've covered many points, and I'm grateful to you. What we'll do now, because we can't go over an hour the way we function on TV, etc. So we still have lots of time. 20 minutes is gone by, but you covered everything that needed to be covered. So what I'll do now, if it's okay with you, I will ask questions, one-liners, and please give me you've covered it all anyway, but I'll ask one-liner questions and give me a short, like 2-minute answer. And then I'll ask Rajnish to comment on that too. Okay, how's that?
Sounds great.
Okay, so We are a nonprofit called choprafoundation.org. And for the last 20 years, we've been working really with one mission statement, only one: personal and social transformation to reach a critical mass of about 1 billion people. 1 billion, we're not there yet. We're 15 million, but we'll get there. So we want to reach 1 billion people with one vision. And that one vision is as follows. If you put a gun to my head in the middle of the night and you said, "What's your vision?" This is it: reach a critical mass of 1 billion people for personal and social transformation, for a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. I'll repeat that: critical mass for a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. Now, you've covered everything in your story already. So, the one-liner questions that I'm going to pose now for you: less than 2 minutes, and Rajnish comment, less than 1 minute. And we'll go from there. We have this great opportunity to speak to a pioneer, so let him do most of the speaking. 2 minutes for him, 1 minute for me, 30 seconds for asking the questions for me, okay? So first question, Dr. Gardner, Christopher, what's the connection, if any, between food, violence, and peace?
Great question. So I think part of what's going on in society right now is our disconnection from so many things. I don't understand how my phone works. I don't understand politics. It's out of my control. Food is not out of your control. If you have to eat every day, and the more we look into the foods that we're eating, I think this is an old John Muir quote, if you start tugging on it, you find out it's connected to everything. And so there's an opportunity here to look into your food sources, who grew it, who produced it, what's good for me, what's it related to. And if you make food choices that align with your personal values, I think it's easier to reconnect with the values that would help us eliminate violence and some of the problems in the world. So I think food is a very accessible starting point for many people. So I'd love to pursue that dialogue and hear what Rajnish thinks.
Go ahead.
I completely agree. Also, one of the things that I think some people have tried to connect maybe with the type of food and whether that leads to changes in behavior. I don't know much about that, but I think, like you said, food connects us in many different ways and societies. And knowing the source of food and being conscious about food definitely will have a positive impact towards peace.
So my only comment is just based on what both of you have said, and Dr. Gardner has said, there's a lot of violence that goes into producing food,
Yes.
animal rights and everything else. And also the quality of food in Eastern wisdom traditions, food is modified consciousness. So the quality of food influences the quality of experience when we talk to people engaged in peace activity. In fact, now there's a whole chain of restaurants called Peace Foods, as you know. So enough on that. Second question for Dr. Gardner: food and social justice.
That's the whole question. It's kind of like a statement, not a question. But yes, so that's actually, so let me tell you why this class that I've been teaching is so interesting, because for me at one point, it was fascinating to see that environmental concerns might be another way to motivate students. If they really knew how much water or greenhouse gas was being wasted by the way we grew food, they might be motivated to make their change. And I've been teaching this class for 15 years. Within the last 3 or 4, I've seen a shift in the students. They actually turn me to social justice issues. They say, but what about those slaughterhouse workers? What about how many undocumented folks are working there without healthcare? And they've increased the line speed. There's a pandemic for COVID. They've said the meat packers are essential workers. We have huge outbreaks of COVID. In the poultry line speeds, they just proposed increasing that, but that got cut back. No, don't increase the line speeds. That job is hard enough without having more chickens come through. So I continue to see the Stanford students making me shift. I say, no, I'm going to cover that later. I say, no, we need you to cover that now. There's structural racism involved here. There's Black farmers who aren't getting access to land. So yes, I think food is an incredible place to deal with social justice. And my students are very aware of this.
Rajnish.
Well, I will take this to a little bit of a global level. I think even in other countries, especially, I've been learning a lot about India, for example, and there are very small farmers, don't even have 1 acre of land, and they're having issues with uh, pricing and how much they get in return after all the work, hard work. Recognizing all the effort in growing, I think, should also be part of social justice and our awareness of how our food is grown, what is put into growing our foods, and how we care about the people who grow our food.
So, question number 3, just as a consequence of what you both said, and this should be short answer because it's linked to the previous one: food and economic justice.
Yes. So we have the labor force growing our food, the farmers, they're not earning a living wage. And so for economic justice, we need to pay them more. I know that sounds like we already have people who can't afford enough food, but that's where we need governments to step in. Some of the things we're subsidizing are not correct. Most importantly, for the dignity of the folks who grow and produce and deliver and process our food, they have to make a living wage. And that's intolerable.
Nish?
I will also add that I think consumer awareness is really critical here, because as much as consumers become aware of these economic values that are placed in the whole entire food chain, starting from production, I think consumers can really drive this change to balance the economy throughout the chain.
So Christopher has already addressed this in his story, but I'd just like to reinforce the point. Next question is food and how we can contribute to reversing climate change.
Yeah, and so that's an easy one. So we do have some questions about some health aspects, but again and again, it's a more plant-based diet. The publications just keep rolling one after the other about impact on the climate. Grains and legumes, if we look at the Eat Lancet report that came out in 2019, 37 investigators, 17 countries put together a global transformative diet, a planetary health diet. It was plant-based. Interestingly, there's a little pushback from this from people saying, oh, this is pretty arrogant of the US to be saying cutting back on meat. If you looked across all the countries that they were looking at, it actually suggested some of the countries had room for eating more meat because they don't have access to much. It really wasn't a no meat, everyone go vegan, vegetarian. It was, oh my God, look how much meat we eat in Northern America. It's obscene how much. We really need to cut back. And the benefits for not just greenhouse gases. So Deepak, one of the things that I've started teaching in my class is planetary boundaries, which is an expansion on greenhouse gases. So it's greenhouse gases and water and biodiversity, which is related to chopping down rainforests to grow soy and corn or to graze cattle for beef. It's also excessive nitrogen, excessive phosphorus that's leading to eutrophication. And so on many different angles, this shift to a whole food plant-based diet does not have to be vegan or vegetarian, but a plant-based diet has dramatic impact potential for the globe.
Rajnish.
I agree with everything Dr. Gardner has said, and I will just add from where the area of focus that I have more, which is inputs into growing foods again and soils, and going back to what about nitrogen and phosphorus, and really caring about the microorganisms and bacteria that form part of the soil. But also, I think we just stop there. We need to also consider the organism, the crop, the plant that we actually eat, what kind of microbiomes are being evolved inside the plants as well. I think all of these things link to environmental healthy environment in the end.
So, okay, so we've discussed a lot of issues, and then Dr. Gardner spoke about weight loss, he talked about health, he talked about joy. So, I think we've covered the mission statement: a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. So, what I'd like to share with you now in a few minutes is where we are at the Chopra Foundation with Rajnish, and I'd like some comments from Christopher afterwards. Okay, so and then we'll go from there. So, over the last few years, I personally and my colleague Rudy Tanzi, who's a geneticist at Harvard University and is a professor at Harvard Medical School, Mass General, we've written 3 books together. But I've learned a lot from him, and he convinced me about 4 or 5 years ago that only 3 to 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. The rest come from lifestyle, including quality of sleep, stress management, emotions, biological rhythms, connection with nature, nutrition, and also spiritual self-reflection. So that's the basis of what we do, both research and otherwise, at our foundation, with the idea that we can influence 95% of or more of chronic illness once we understand how chronic illness is related to low-grade inflammation, dysbiosis, anxiety, depression. They all seem to go together and precede chronic illness by several years. So given that, also the recent interest in nutrition worldwide, and particularly in how it relates to health and uh, even emotions, has become a very big interest of ours. We know that 80% of the serotonin comes from the gut, and it's produced by the bacteria in our body, the microbiome. So a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, I came across some literature which said that 30% of the microbiome had disappeared in urban societies. So New York City, Chicago, wherever, Calcutta, New Delhi, 30% of the microbiome has disappeared, and the rest is dysfunctional anyway. It's all influenced by processed, manufactured, refined food that also has antibiotics frequently, hormones, steroids, inflammatory products. Anything that comes in a can or has a label is probably not good for your genes. And 99% of these genes are bacterial in your body. 1% are or less are human, and even the human genes can be upgraded through lifestyle and through epigenetic modulation. So basically, you can change the genetic information of the total body. And if the body is the printout of genes, and if genes are the symbolic representation of life on our planet, then resurrecting the planetary microbiome might be a key to add on to all the things that Dr. Gardner has been saying as a next step. So then we came across Rajnish, whom I'd met at the Science of Consciousness conferences, and I became aware there was a profession called photobiology. I didn't even know about it. So I asked Rajnish, is it true that if we go under the surface of the earth in a rainforest, like say the Amazon or any other rainforest, not yet spoiled, and we go under the ground, is it uh, true that the under the ground, and now I'm thinking even in the sea, in the oceans, there is more genetic information and more biodiversity of genetic information than the surface of our planet, including all the rainforests? He confirmed for me that this is actually true. So, nevertheless, if it's not 100% true, but it makes sense, that the genetic information that we have access to in natural environments, particularly rainforests and under the surface and in the oceans, maybe in the depths of the ocean, is the key to resurrecting not only uh, a balanced ecosystem, which is the basis of all life, by the way. But not only is it the key to resurrecting a balanced ecosystem, but it might be the key to restoring um, the sanctity of the biosphere. So, current science, for example, says you need a certain number of constants in nature to give rise to life. You know, gravitational constant, electromagnetic constant, force fields, particles all have to come together to create life. You know, I had a communication with Freeman Dyson at Princeton before he died, and he said three riddles have occupied his entire life. One is the universe fine-tuned for mind and life. Secondly, uh, our own consciousness. And thirdly, the apparently unpredictable or random movement of atoms. And he said, I don't have the answer to these questions, but I think they're connected. So recently I started thinking maybe it is not the constants that give rise to life, it's the other way around. Life gives rise to the biosphere. And that life is symbolically represented in the entangled genome of our planet, which gave rise to life. Okay. And if we restored life on this planet, then we would also restore everything else that we discuss, but particularly climate change, notwithstanding all the data on greenhouse gases, but even more. We could bring back species that we don't see anymore or that are rare, theoretically. We could have Jurassic Park, who knows? But there are limits to imagination. On the other hand, imagination precedes good science as well. So one of our projects right now, actually, we have a number of projects. One is Rewilding Cities, and we are working with nonprofit organizations and even businesses to help them rewild their lands, whether there's somebody in Netherlands who wants to do it, there are Indian ashrams that want to do it, there are organizations, indigenous people who want to do it in the United States, but also Australia, elsewhere. So we are on to this project. We're calling it Resurrecting the Planetary Microbiome, which has huge implications for health of not only our individuals, but society and ultimately the planet. So that's where we are. But given that also I've been having conversations with not only Rajnish and luminaries like yourself, but other nutritional scientists like Uma Naidu at Harvard. And at this moment, we are envisioning creating something called the International Academy of Nutritional Psychiatry. And I think there's no such thing that exists right now. And the International Academy of Nutritional Psychiatry, we would love to have you and Rajneesh as part of that if you're amenable to it. But if we create a movement that links mood to behavior, to climate change, to social justice, to economic justice, but ultimately to resurrecting life on this planet, then food is probably the way to go, in addition to everything else that we talk about, you know, deep rest, meditation, mindfulness, exercise, vagal stimulation, restoring biological rhythms. It's all entangled, as you said. So my first question after that uh, long explanation is, uh, what do you think of this idea? And can we, you know, that these days people are talking about emergence, and emergence, social scientists say happens when you have maximum diversity of people with a shared vision that complement each other's strengths and that are emotionally and spiritually bonded, then we can create a movement through the internet, and we can have um, subsidiaries of this nutritional academy globally. We can get food companies interested to sponsor research. Dr. Gardner has a background in getting research money, so do we. And so does Rajnish. And I think a collaborative enterprise of some kind would create a global movement. So I'll stop there, ask Christopher to comment, and then Rajnish, yourself as well.
This is one of these big, hairy, audacious ideas, right?
Very audacious. What's a dream worth if it doesn't stretch the imagination?
Yeah, and in the back of my mind, I'm picturing the connection with Rajnish as we go from the soil microbiome to the human microbiome. So I tell you why I really like this. And one of the terms that I took from your whole conversation there was mood. So in my work in nutrition science, trying to change behavior, traditionally, I've found people who have excess weight, excess cholesterol, excess glucose, and say, oh, I think I can help you lower that. And that's your motivation out of fear. I'm going to try to get you to change your diet. And it's long-term. I'm going to prevent cancer or heart disease somewhere down the road. Turns out working with one of my favorite new colleagues, Justin Sonnenberg, and his wife, Erica Sonnenberg, who have written the book, Good Gut, about the microbiome. Some of the anecdotal things that they've seen, now keep in mind, most of their career has been in mouse models where there's a lot of control. In the last 5 years, they've been working with me a lot. We've been doing a lot of human studies. And one of the anecdotal stuff we're hearing is mood, is as you change the diet and change the microbiome, the outcomes of interest become much more proximal. And I'm thinking of wellness here instead of absence of disease. And so if this is more creativity, more resilience, more energy, less fatigue, I'm completely intrigued by this area, partly in a selfish way. I'm really tired of how ineffective these long-term motivations are. Eat well today so you won't have a heart attack in 40 years. Yeah, but it couldn't have the cookie right now. Yes, you could have the cookie right now, but you're really going to have to clean stuff up if you don't want to have a heart attack. What if you wanted to be feeling really creative by the end of today? What if you wanted to have that energy? And it really likely is got a connection in the microbiome, and the human microbiome has a connection to the soil microbiome. So I love the rewilding idea. That is phenomenal. I'll just give a plug for my colleague, Justin Sonnenberg, who has access to all the equipment in his lab. He has, for the last 5 years, been rewilding his own microbiome because he has data. He has some of these data you mentioned, Deepak, about showing traditional hunter-gatherer tribes and their microbial diversity and milieu compared to the urban. And yes, we are losing microbiomes, and he's got mouse studies that show in some cases you can't recover them. They're going extinct. And so there is some urgency to rewild our microbiome so we don't lose this capacity. And for me, part of it, as you bring up nutrition and psychiatry, is this the motivation of mood right away. You don't have to wait to feel this. You're going to feel this pretty soon. And so I would love to develop that further with you and your colleagues and Rajnish.
And your colleagues too, like the people you mentioned, Justin.
Yes.
If it is going to be a global movement, we need everyone who has that shared vision. So thank you. Rajnish?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gardner. And it reminded me a few years ago, Justin Sonnenberg and we were applying for a grant together to look at the microbiomes that were in the food. And if you eat the microbes that were on the food and how your gut was impacted. We didn't get funded at that time, but I think that still is an interesting and important study. But I agree with everything you said there. And Deepak, this is a phenomenal idea. And I think in terms of mood, food, like you said, plays a very important role, and microbes are very important. And going all the way back to the soil is a brilliant idea. It's one key in a way that can then connect to making the whole planet, putting the whole planet in a better mood, literally. I will just say that my focus has been in the agricultural side, and that's why I really enjoyed listening to both Christopher and Deepak on the human side and the mood side. I will add that we have been focusing on the soil microbiomes a lot, which is very important. But I equate soil microbiome to our refrigerator. It's very important what we put in the fridge, but ultimately what we eat, what we take out of the refrigerator and what we eat is what the plant is doing. Plant actually has an ability to select if the soil microbiome has been enriched and has been rewilded. We also need to think about what kinds of plants and the plant health that's going to then absorb that goodness from the soil and put it into the food that then we are going to consume. We are not paying too much attention to that step yet. So I'm very excited to hear this and be able to work with on this specific topic, because there are ways to also test and look at plants and their microbes in healthy soils to make sure that the rewilding is translating into the intended good mood for the whole planet. So it's very exciting. Thank you for sharing.
So, well, onward, we're going to stretch more than we can reach. But what's a dream for? And we'll do it. So I thank you both for an amazing conversation to be continued. You'll be hearing from me and from Punacha Machaya, our CEO, and from Rajnish and Christopher. We want to reach out to your friends and colleagues. We're just starting, so let's create the vision together. And
Sounds very exciting.
very grateful to both of you. So